Today we have a crazy revenge story about a manager that humiliates their employees. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, application denied. That's what you get for thinking you can mess with me. I was 22 when I became a research and teaching assistant for my favorite professor in college, and despite being a well-read and perhaps the most brilliant woman in the department, I noticed how she was often passed up for leadership opportunities and other stuff because she's a woman. The sexism in the engineering department was crazy. Fast forward to when I was officially employed as a professor by the university. Many of the professors, including the one I worked for, had retired. So I figured that since the new set of professors that the university was hiring were younger, at least compared to the old ones, sexism wasn't something I would experience. I thought that if I did experience sexism, it would never be in the same way as my former boss experienced it. If my future self could hear the old me assuring myself that I would never have to deal with sexism, I'm pretty sure she'd roar with laughter. Boy, was I naive. 7 other professors were employed at the same time as me. 4 of them were people in their 40s who had taught in other universities or were still teaching in other universities at the time they were offered employment, and the other 3, myself included, didn't have actual professor experience. I had worked as a teaching assistant and so had the other 2, but none of us had experience as professors. One of them, a woman, was a single mom in her 30s. The second, a man who was in the same age bracket as me, and then there was me. I immediately thought I'd be better acquainted with the man because we're both in the same age bracket, unmarried and child-free. I'm not the kind of person that makes friends with my colleagues at work. I'm friendly and nice, but I do not ever think of them as friends. For the first 2 months, the guy professor was extremely nice to me. He texted me all the time and sent memes about unruly students. We laughed about silly stuff together, and sometimes we had lunch at the professor's cafeteria. I was single at the time and was actively looking forward to being in a relationship, and I told him this when he asked me once about my relationship status. He said he was single too. I nodded absent-mindedly, picturing my future with whatever sweet dude the universe sent my way. The single mom was at our table that day as we talked, but she mostly said nothing. On the evening of that same day, I went into her office to ask for a favor, and she mentioned something about the guy professor flirting with me. You know what? Let's just call this guy Mike, so things don't get confusing. She said Mike was flirting with me at lunch, but I didn't seem to be in the least interested. She then asked me if I didn't find him attractive. I vehemently disagreed with her. I told her that he wasn't flirting with me and that we're just cool like that. She smiled and repeated that he was in fact flirting with me. She also pointed out his actions in the past that proved that he liked me. I didn't want to argue, so I just smiled politely and asked for the favor. The next day, I thought about what she had said and nearly burst out laughing. There was no way she thought Mike liked me. Mike and I aren't even friends. Exactly 1 week after my colleague said Mike was flirting with me, he asked me out. He did it in a very subtle manner that, had she not pointed his interest out to me the week before, I would have gone out with him without knowing that it was an actual date. We were talking about how old movies are so much better than the newer ones, and the kinds of movies we loved as teenagers. He then suggested that we go out to see one of those movies on the Thursday of the next week. He slid it in so well that I could have just said yes. I had to stop myself when I remembered what my other colleague said. I told him I was going to be busy making scripts, and that I had postponed it for way too long. He just said okay and walked away. The week after, the 3 of us were at the table eating our lunch when he asked me if I wanted to get coffee together sometimes. The thing is, I love coffee, and I'd mentioned that a shop just outside the university gate sells the best coffee ever. He then asked if we could go there together sometime. I declined immediately and continued eating my food. This time it was weird because our colleague was present, and it became clear that he was actually asking me out. After lunch, she asked again if I wasn't attracted to him. I told her no way was it happening. I have a strict principle to never date someone I work with, and I intend to stick with it. She smiled mischievously and walked away. At that point, I started to recall how she acts around him. It was almost as though she liked him. One afternoon, Mike texted to ask if I wanted to have drinks together after I closed for the day. I thanked him and declined, and to prevent a future occurrence, I told him that I could never date someone at work. It was just not my style to do so. He didn't respond to my text until late that night. He said it was okay and that he respected my decision. The next day, I said hello to him at work, hoping with everything that things would not be so awkward. But he replied curtly and walked away before I could say anything else. To be honest, I was not bothered by his attitude. I had just rejected him, so I expected some unusual behavior. I became concerned about his behavior when weeks passed and he kept up with the childish behavior. I confronted him and asked if he was mad because I rejected him. I guess that pissed him off because that was the beginning of his attacks against my person. First of all, I don't know what he told our single mom colleague, but she began to avoid me. She gave curt replies and was very unfriendly to me. I felt bad because they were the closest I had to friends in my department. I sat by myself at lunch for a week and decided that there was no point in going to the cafeteria. I decided to stop going to eat in the cafeteria and just ate lunch in my office. I soon noticed that they both seemed to be in a romantic relationship of sorts. They would hold hands and kiss briefly. It was unprofessional and cringe. I didn't want to believe they were doing all that for my benefit, but it did seem like that. They only behaved like teenage couples when they were around me, and it was always exaggerated and ridiculous. It was like high school all over again. I had stopped caring at that point because their behavior was childish and irritating. I completely stopped trying and focused on doing my job. I was doing that until Mike wrote a whole paper criticizing a paper I had written a year before. It was funny because when we first met, he said he'd read that paper and even praised me for it. The criticism was so popular that a professor from the Department of Gender Studies wrote a paper on it. She pointed out that the writer's criticism felt too personal. Students and professors talked so much about it that many people started to think of him as a chauvinist. A lot of controversy surrounded that paper. Some people were strongly on his side, but most people were on mine. I was pissed. I was very pissed, and I swore to myself that I'd get back at him. After months of trying to redeem himself from his reputation as the professor who wrote a critique that sounded way too personal, he decided to embark on a research project, and as expected, he needed funding. I'm going to be honest, the research is one that, if properly carried out, could be groundbreaking and very helpful to our department and the university at large, but I set out to sabotage it. When he presented the proposed research to other professors in the faculty by giving a brilliant 15-minute speech and doing the whole slide presentation, I just knew that the others were sold. Of course, I was never going to vote in favor of it, but I could not stop him alone. I began to do my research on just how I would make sure that his research never sees the light of day. I considered coming up with a better proposal and winning him, but I had very little time. It would also be too obvious that I was antagonizing him, and I didn't want that at all. I wanted a quiet, sweet revenge, one that would not tamper the peaceful and demure reputation I had. I remembered that I had one weapon to use against my colleague: my beauty. Not to brag, but I was a very beautiful woman. I'm still pretty, but at the time, my beauty was at its peak. I knew all I had to do was seduce someone up there and get them to disapprove of something, and I knew just who that was going to be. When I was working as a TA, my boss invited me to her husband's birthday party, and I met an older gentleman there. He was in his late 40s at the time, and I knew from the way his eyes followed me around the garden that he was interested in me. My boss mentioned that he was a widower, and then, more importantly, that he headed the board that determined what project or research was going to be funded by the university. Usually, each department recommends research, which the board would usually approve, but the board can decide to disregard the recommendation. I called my boss to ask if she could set us on a date, and she happily agreed. Having married a much older man herself, she was excited for me to join in. She set the date, and we had an amazing time. I could tell that he was mesmerized and flattered that I was interested in him. He asked me out on the second date in the middle of the first date, and when we had a third date, he asked me why I wanted to go out with him. He was smart enough to know that my boss had set the date up at my request. I told him what I wanted from him. I was completely honest about what I wanted and why I wanted it. That pissed him off. He was visibly disappointed, but I trusted in my beauty enough to know that he could only stay mad for so long. I told him I was genuinely interested in him and that even if he wouldn't grant my request, it was totally fine. We could go on to have a relationship anyway, but I was going to get my revenge. He agreed to assist me. Meanwhile, Mike was bragging to the whole department about his research and what he was going to achieve when funding finally came in. Well, guess what? His funding application was denied. And guess who went to his office to gloat and mock him? Me. I mean, that's just a classic Black Widow move. You're trouble, OP. I get why you did what you did, but you are trouble. If I knew you, I would definitely be keeping my eye on you, and not like that. But regardless, what goes around comes around, yada yada, that whole cliche circle. So let's move on. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these Nuclear Revenge videos, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to our podcast. That said, our next story is: cheating ex tried to sabotage my life, so I got him fired. Hey people, this is a wild one, so buckle up. For context, my name's Emily, 27-year-old female, and my ex, Matt, 29-year-old male, was my college boyfriend of 4 years. I thought we were the real deal, planning for the future and everything. Little did I know, he had a secret life that I was about to uncover in the worst way possible. And when he tried to destroy my life after I found out, I made sure to get the last laugh. Matt and I met in college when I was a junior and he was a senior. He had this effortless charm about him. One of those guys who could walk into a room and immediately have everyone's attention. I remember the first time I saw him at a campus party. He was standing with a group of friends, laughing loudly, telling a story with that captivating confidence that just drew people in. He caught me looking at him, flashed me a smile, and the rest was history. Our relationship took off quickly. I fell hard, and so did he. Or at least that's what I thought. Within a few months, we were inseparable. He made me feel like I was the center of his world. He was always texting me sweet little things during the day, planning surprise dates, and telling me how much he admired my passion for writing. I had dated before, but none of my previous relationships had been like this. With Matt, I felt like we had that deep connection everyone talks about, but few people find. We talked about our future, moving in together after college, getting married, even having kids someday. For 4 years, everything seemed perfect on the surface. We had that classic, picture-perfect relationship. At least, that's what I thought. We traveled together, went to concerts, and he'd even introduced me to his family. His parents loved me, especially his mom. She always made me feel like I was already part of the family, inviting me to holiday dinners and calling me for advice about the most random things, like how to decorate their new living room. I thought Matt and I were solid, built on something real, something that would last. After we both graduated, we moved in together into a small but cozy apartment just outside the city. It was exciting, a new chapter for us. We were both starting our careers, me as a copywriter at a marketing firm, and Matt as a marketing director at a tech company. It felt like we were building a life together. We talk about the future like it was a given, always imagining how we'd decorate our future home or what kind of wedding we'd have. I genuinely believed we were on the same page, and in a lot of ways, he played the part perfectly. But there were little things I started noticing. Things I brushed off because I didn't want to admit that there might be cracks in our perfect relationship. Matt had always been flirty. That was part of his charm, right? He was a people person, and I loved that about him. But over time, the flirtiness started feeling more deliberate. It wasn't just harmless banter with waitresses or casual conversations at parties anymore. He'd get a little too close to women at bars, his hand lingering on their arms a little too long, his smile a little too suggestive. When I brought it up, he'd laugh it off and call me paranoid. "Emily, come on, you know you're the only one for me," he'd say with that disarming grin. And because I loved him, and because I didn't want to believe otherwise, I let it go. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that Matt would never actually do anything to hurt me. We were happy after all. We had a great life, great friends, and a future we'd both talked about in detail. Why would he risk all that? But the red flags kept coming. He'd start disappearing for hours without explanation, saying he was working late or out with the guys. Sometimes he'd be cagey about who he was texting or where he was going. I even started noticing new cologne on him, and when I asked, he said it was a gift from a colleague. Part of me knew something was off, but I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to be that girl, the insecure, jealous girlfriend who ruins everything because of her own doubts. So I stayed quiet. I convinced myself that he was just stressed from work, that I was reading too much into things. I reminded myself of all the good times, all the love he had shown me, and how we had built this life together. But deep down, a nagging feeling started to grow. One I couldn't quite shake, even though I desperately tried to. I still remember one evening that should have been a red flag for me, but I brushed it off. We were sitting on the couch, binge-watching a show we both loved, and his phone kept buzzing. He ignored it at first, but when it buzzed a fourth time, I couldn't help but glance over. The name Claire popped up on the screen, and I asked casually, "Who's Claire?" He didn't even flinch, just gave me a quick answer. "Oh, just someone from work." Then he put his phone down, gave me a reassuring kiss, and that was that. I wanted to believe him so badly, so I did. Looking back, I can't believe how easily I let him talk his way out of things like that. But that's the thing about being in love with someone who's good at manipulating. They make you doubt yourself, make you question your own instincts until you start to believe their lies instead of the truth that's right in front of you. As the months passed, things started to feel distant. He stopped planning dates and spent more time glued to his phone or working late. I'd try to get him to open up, to talk to me about what was going on, but every time I brought up how I was feeling, he'd turn it back on me. "Why are you always so negative, Emily? You're overthinking things. We're fine," he'd say, making me feel guilty for even questioning the state of our relationship. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that all couples go through it, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of the end, and I was too blind to see it. I'm not proud of this, but eventually I went through his phone and found dozens of texts, pictures, and even hotel reservations. Not only had he been cheating on me with Claire, but there were other women too. He had a full-blown rotation going on. My heart sank, and I felt like an idiot for not seeing the signs earlier. When I confronted him, he didn't even bother denying it. He shrugged and said, "I didn't think you'd find out. It's not a big deal." I was livid. I kicked him out of our apartment that night and immediately blocked him on everything. After the breakup, I focused on picking up the pieces of my life. I moved to a new apartment, threw myself into my career, and started seeing a therapist to work through the emotional fallout. I wanted nothing to do with Matt, but Matt, he had other plans. About a month after the breakup, I started getting weird messages from mutual friends. They told me that Matt was spreading rumors about me, saying I was crazy, that I cheated on him, and that I was the one who wrecked our relationship. He even had the nerve to claim I was stalking him, trying to get him back. The gaslighting was next level. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking that anyone who knew me would see through his lies. But then things escalated. Matt somehow got access to my social media accounts. We'd shared passwords during our relationship, and he started posting fake statuses and DMs from my profiles. He made it look like I was the one obsessing over him and messaging him nonstop. Some people believed it. I started getting cold shoulders from people I thought were friends. My professional reputation even took a hit because of the drama he was creating. I realized that if I didn't do something, Matt was going to ruin my life, so I decided to fight back. I knew Matt well, too well. He was the type of guy who loved control, loved playing the victim, and loved getting away with things. But there was one thing he loved even more: his precious job. Like I said, Matt worked as a marketing director at a mid-level tech company, and his career was everything to him. He'd brag about how indispensable he was, how his boss trusted him with confidential projects, and how he was next in line for a promotion. And that's where I saw my opening. I started doing some digging. Over the course of our relationship, Matt had shared a lot of details about his work, more than he probably should have. I remembered he had a work laptop that he sometimes brought home, and after some investigation, I found out that he wasn't exactly keeping company data secure. He'd been transferring files to his personal drive and had even sold some of the company's ad strategies to a competitor. This was straight up corporate espionage, and he was too cocky to think anyone would ever find out. But I knew. I waited for the right moment. I kept my distance, didn't confront him, didn't even give him a hint that I was on to him. Instead, I started compiling evidence. I gathered screenshots of his conversations about selling company data, copies of the files he transferred, and even messages where he bragged to his friends about how he was making bank on the side. When I had enough, I made my move. First, I sent an anonymous email to his company's HR department, attaching the evidence I'd collected. I framed it in a way that made it clear this was a serious breach of confidentiality. To make it even juicier, I hinted that Matt had been bragging about his illegal side hustle and that other employees were starting to notice. I knew that HR wouldn't be able to let this slide. Then I sat back and waited. About 2 weeks after I sent the email, I got word from a mutual friend that Matt had been fired. Not only had they canned him, but the company was also investigating him for theft of intellectual property and was considering pressing charges. Apparently, they were furious because they'd lost a major client due to the stolen data Matt had sold. His reputation in the industry was trashed. Word spread quickly, and no other marketing firm wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole. He was effectively blacklisted from his career, but it didn't stop there. I found out through some more mutual friends that Matt was spiraling. He had tried applying for jobs in other fields, but no one would hire him because of his tainted record. He even tried reaching out to me, probably thinking I didn't know about his downfall. He sent me this pathetic email saying he was sorry for everything and that he missed me and wanted to start fresh. Yeah, no thanks. Matt's life quickly fell apart. Without a job, he couldn't afford his apartment and had to move back in with his parents in a different state. Claire, the girl he cheated on me with, she dumped him the second she realized he was broke and unemployable. From what I hear, he's still trying to claw his way back into the marketing world, but it's not going well. As for me, I'm doing great. I've rebuilt my social circle, repaired my professional reputation, and started dating again. Someone much better than Matt, by the way. Oh, and I changed all my passwords, so no more hacking into my accounts for him. In the end, Matt tried to sabotage my life because I had the audacity to dump him after he cheated, but all he did was dig his own grave. I didn't just get even, I got ahead. You know, reading this story, it's satisfying to hear that everything that ultimately happened to Matt was his own doing. It's bad enough that you're a cheater and a liar, but he just doesn't seem like he's a good person at all. To spread rumors, lies, gaslight, and slander after the breakup, and you're doing shady things on the side at your job. Like, you just suck as a human being, so your downfall, so satisfying, they should make a movie about it. Our next story is, toxic manager humiliated me, so I exposed his illegal secrets. So I, 26-year-old female, work for a mid-sized marketing company. I've been here for about 3 years, and things were going pretty well for the first 2 years. Then, my department got a new manager, Steve, 45-year-old male, and my life became a nightmare. Steve wasn't just any new manager, he came in like a storm. You know the type, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately acts like they own the place. He'd only been in the company for a week when the changes started. Right from day one, Steve made it clear that he wasn't there to blend in or fit into the existing culture. He was there to reshape it. He loved to drop names of all the big companies he had worked for, as if that alone validated everything he did. "Oh, when I was at so-and-so, we did things this way," he'd say with that smug, knowing smile. He also had this annoying habit of throwing around business buzzwords to sound smarter than he was. Everything was about synergy, optimization, and paradigm shifts. But when it came to the actual work, well, Steve was all talk and no action. It didn't take long for me and my coworkers to realize that Steve's experience wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The first few projects he managed went off the rails almost immediately. Deadlines were missed, client meetings were disasters, and communication became a total mess. But of course, it was never Steve's fault. He always found a way to pin the blame on someone else, and lucky me, I quickly became his go-to scapegoat. Steve was a master of manipulation. He had this uncanny ability to say something that, on the surface, seemed like a suggestion, but really, it was a command. For example, in a team meeting, he'd say something like, "Jane, I think you should handle the client report, don't you?" And if I dared to disagree or suggest someone else should do it, he'd follow up with, "Well, it's just that you've been struggling lately, and I want to make sure you're still able to contribute, before things get worse." And when I say Steve humiliated me publicly, I'm not just talking about subtle digs. He went all in. He'd interrupt me mid-presentation in front of clients to correct me, even when I was right. He loved to throw shade in front of the team during meetings, always with that passive-aggressive tone. "Jane, I thought we agreed on a different direction." "Oh, no? Maybe I misremembered." Followed by an awkward silence while everyone shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It wasn't just the meetings either. Steve was notorious for sending passive-aggressive emails, CCing half the company, making it seem like I was dropping the ball when, in reality, I was doing double the work just to keep things afloat. And the worst part? The higher-ups loved him. He was a smooth talker, knew how to schmooze with the executives, and always made it look like he was a visionary leader transforming the department. Meanwhile, the rest of us were slowly suffocating under his micromanagement and egotistical attitude. I'll never forget the day it all came to a head. We were gearing up for a big meeting with some senior executives from corporate, people who had the power to make or break careers with a single decision. This meeting was crucial because it was for a project that I had poured weeks of my life into. It was my idea from the start. My late nights, my sweat and stress that had turned it into something special. I was proud of the work, and I genuinely believed it was going to be a turning point for me within the company. But then Steve swooped in like he always did. On the day of the meeting, I sat there as Steve strutted into the conference room, acting like he'd masterminded the entire project. He began the presentation, taking credit for everything. And as much as it hurt to see him claim my work as his own, I kept my mouth shut, knowing that in corporate politics, sometimes you have to pick your battles. But things took a sharp turn when one of the executives, Mr. Turner, 58-year-old male, asked a detailed question about the campaign strategy. Steve, who clearly hadn't prepared for any specifics, started fumbling. He threw out some vague, buzzword-laden nonsense, but Mr. Turner wasn't buying it. "I don't see how that ties into the overall target market analysis," Mr. Turner said, flipping through the printed slides in front of him. "Could you clarify that?" Steve's face flushed for a split second before he turned to me, sitting quietly in the corner, and said, "Jane was supposed to take care of that. I'm not sure why it wasn't included in the final version." The room went dead silent. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. The detail had been included in the original plan. Steve was the one who had removed it during his so-called revisions, but here I was being scapegoated in front of the top brass like I was some careless amateur who didn't know how to do my job. I could feel all eyes on me, the heat rising in my cheeks as I tried to figure out how to respond without making the situation worse. My mind was racing. Should I call him out in front of the execs? Should I let it slide and handle it later? The seconds felt like hours. But before I could say anything, Steve cut me off, continuing, "I'll have Jane follow up with the details after the meeting. It seems like this might have been overlooked, but we'll make sure it gets handled." He waved me off as if I was some incompetent intern, not the person who had carried the project on her back for weeks. And just like that, the conversation moved on, with Steve smoothly shifting the focus back to himself and whatever surface-level jargon he could come up with to save face. I sat there in stunned silence for the rest of the meeting, feeling utterly humiliated. It wasn't just about the fact that he had taken credit for my work. That had become the norm by this point. No, this was different. This was a public embarrassment. A deliberate attempt to make me look like the weakest link in front of the people who mattered most in the company. And it worked. By the end of the meeting, I felt completely demoralized. I could see the look of doubt in the eyes of the executives, and even my colleagues. Steve had managed to plant the seed that I wasn't reliable, that I couldn't handle the pressure of big projects, and that's exactly what he wanted. After the meeting, Steve called me into his office once again. He shut the door and, in a voice dripping with condescension, said, "You need to step up your game, Jane. That wasn't a good look in there. I expect more from you." I expect more from you? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was the one who had set me up to fail, yet here he was, acting like I was the one who had dropped the ball. I wanted to scream, to tell him that he was the one who had sabotaged the project, but I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. Steve had too much power, too much control over the narrative. So I nodded, biting my tongue, and left his office feeling defeated. But inside, something shifted. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Steve had crossed a line that day, and I wasn't going to let him keep walking all over me. I realized I had to be smart about how I handled this, or I'd lose more than just my dignity. I could lose my career. That was the last straw. I was done with Steve's abuse, but I knew I needed to be smart about how I handled it. If I went to HR with no proof, it would be my word against his, and Steve was a master manipulator. So I started documenting everything. Every time he insulted me, every time he took credit for my work, every time he micromanaged a project into the ground, I wrote it all down and saved emails, texts, and notes. Then I started to notice something odd. Steve had this weird habit of working late at night, long after everyone else had gone home. At first, I thought he was just a workaholic, but then I noticed that whenever he worked late, there would be strange discrepancies in the project budgets. Numbers wouldn't add up, or certain expenses would be labeled as something vague like miscellaneous services. I had a hunch something shady was going on, but I didn't want to accuse him of anything without proof. One night, I stayed late at the office under the guise of working on a big project. Steve was there, of course, locked in his office. While he was busy, I snuck over to the finance department and had a chat with one of my friends, Sarah, 29-year-old female, who works there. I casually asked her if she'd noticed anything weird with the budget reports from our department, and she confirmed that things hadn't been adding up for months. She was too scared to say anything because Steve had a way of making people feel like their jobs were on the line if they questioned him. I knew then that I had to dig deeper. I asked Sarah if she could pull some of the more recent budget reports for me, and she agreed, though she was nervous about it. What we found was shocking. Steve had been embezzling money from the company. He'd been inflating project costs, pocketing the extra cash, and labeling it under fake expenses like freelance consulting or event coordination. He was sneaky about it too, only siphoning small amounts at a time so it wouldn't raise any immediate red flags. But over the months, it had added up to tens of thousands of dollars. I knew I couldn't sit on this information. I compiled all the documentation I had, emails, budget reports, timestamps, everything, and scheduled a meeting with HR. I presented them with the evidence and made sure to emphasize not only the embezzlement, but also Steve's toxic behavior towards me and the rest of the team. To say HR was shocked would be an understatement. They promised to investigate immediately, but I didn't stop there. I also anonymously tipped off the company's internal audit team. I knew HR would have to act quickly once the audit team got involved, and there'd be no sweeping this under the rug. About 2 weeks later, the audit team wrapped up their investigation, and Steve was called into a meeting with the executives. I wasn't there, obviously, but I heard from Sarah that Steve tried to deny everything at first. But when they confronted him with the detailed reports I provided, he crumbled. Steve was fired on the spot, escorted out of the building by security, and from what I've heard, the company is pursuing legal action against him. Apparently, they've also been in touch with other companies Steve worked for in the past to see if he pulled the same stunt there. Word is, he's been blacklisted in the industry. Since Steve's departure, the whole department has been doing so much better. Morale is up, productivity is higher, and I'm finally getting the credit I deserve for my work. I was even given a promotion and a hefty raise as a thank you for exposing Steve's illegal activities. Oh, and remember that meeting where he humiliated me in front of the VPs? Well, one of the execs reached out to me personally to apologize for how I was treated. They said they had no idea what Steve was like and thanked me for bringing the truth to light. It took months of patience and a lot of stress, but in the end, justice was served. Steve thought he could humiliate me and get away with stealing from the company. But now he's the one who's unemployed, disgraced, and potentially facing legal charges. Yeah, what a slimeball, not just a despicable person, but a crook as well, embezzling money. This just kind of reminds me, for you old school Scooby-Doo fans out there, when they unmask the villain at the end and he's like, and I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you meddling kids. Well, OP is that meddling kid in this case. Way to shut this guy down. Great way to end the story. That said, our next story is, I got back at sister-in-law for almost ruining my home. I, 33-year-old female, have had my fair share of sibling drama. This is because I have two junior brothers always at each other's throats, but if there is one thing my siblings and I never are to one another, is being inconsiderate and insensitive to each other's feelings. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about my husband's family, specifically his younger sister. My husband is the first of 3 children. His parents died when he was 20, making him the sole provider of the family. He took on the role of being both a mom and dad to his siblings, although he had help from his relatives. From what he told me, his uncle offered to take care of his siblings while he lived his life, but he felt like it was his responsibility, making him sole provider for his family. He has 2 siblings, his immediate junior brother, Jasper, and his younger brother, Anna. I understood a lot must have happened between them because I know it wasn't an easy decision for my husband, who at the time had to give up his chance at going to college just to take care of his siblings, but somehow this just made Anna so entitled, to put it more frankly, spoiled. She has no respect for anyone, including herself. She feels she can do whatever she likes without thinking of the consequences, and this irks me a lot. Anna and I met twice while I was dating my husband, and both encounters were not the best, but I was willing to put in the effort needed to make Anna feel comfortable around me, since my husband explained to me that she could be a lot, so I knew a little attitude here and there was to be expected. I knew I wasn't liked by her. She made it clear on both occasions, as opposed to Jasper, who wasn't as bad as she was, but was a bit suspicious of me. I figured out later that Jasper was just being protective of his brother, and upon getting to know him better, he wasn't as bad as I thought, but Anna was just different. At first, she was just being overprotective of her brother like Jasper, but as time went by, it became clear to me she hated me because she believed I was going to cause a strain between her and her brother's relationship. To be more specific, Anna knew there was no way my husband could cater for both her needs and his new family needs at the same time, so she thought of me as a rival and was always being mean to me. First, it started off with rude and sarcastic comments towards me whenever I tried to have a conversation with her, and then it got worse. She began to ignore me. Honestly, I was too undramatic to put myself in a sister-in-law war, so I just stopped trying to form a relationship with her. But she had a way of forcing herself into I and my husband's life, and it was exhausting. A few months later, after I got married, Anna came to stay with us. Back then, she was still in college doing her thing, while my husband worked at a condiment company, trying his best to work his way up by putting the extra effort just so she could be promoted. Then, out of the blue, he gets a call from Anna's friend saying she was depressed and needed to be with family. That was the worst timing possible back then, because the wedding expenses and Anna's college tuition was taking a toll on my husband, but we decided to consult a specialist who happened to be Anna's friend, and according to Anna, her therapist. She advised that a retreat was a good way of improving her mental health. I immediately offered to help out with any payments as regarding the retreat, because I knew how tight things were for my husband. I shouldn't have been so trusting because I found out a few months later from my husband there was no retreat. Anna and her friend had played my husband and I because she needed money for a trip with friends, and she knew her brother wouldn't give it to her if she had asked. My husband seemed okay with the whole situation, and this just made me more mad because, in his defense, it was Anna being Anna, while to me, It was an entitled, spoiled brat who has always been handed everything without ever having to work for a dime doing her thing. I knew my money was gone, but I was more than ready to make my husband see with reasons why he should be more disciplined towards Anna rather than being nonchalant about his sister's attitude. I advised him to tell her to maybe get a job, and that did not go well when he brought up the matter to Anna. She was of course quick to blame me, saying she knew it must have been my idea and not my husband, and she knew this would happen. She further went on to say things like how my husband was easily swayed and manipulated and needed to stop listening to others' input in their life. I knew what she meant, but I knew I also wasn't going to give such advice, so I decided to stop with the back and forth and have a serious conversation with her at her college, which I did. I really tried to make her see reasons why a job wouldn't be so bad for her and her brother, but she went out on me, telling me never to meddle in their relationship since it was between her and her brother. I flat out told her that wouldn't be possible since I was married to her brother, and the last stunt she pulled affected both my husband and I, so yeah, she basically needed to grow up. This led to a full-on rival between Anna and I. She was always trying to find ways to torment me whenever she came over to our place, either for the holidays or basically the weekend, but I knew better than playing her games. She, of course, never got a job, and my husband was always taking care of all her needs, which just pissed me off even more. But he found a way to make things work on both sides financially, so that was fine by me. This was going fine till I gave birth to my daughter, Harper. I think this is when my husband got thinking about how he had to focus on his own family, and Anna was grown enough to take care of herself. They had a conversation again, which Anna blamed me for. Honestly, I was tired of her BS at this point. So nothing she said mattered besides she was done with college. It was time to face real life. Only Anna wasn't ready nor willing to do these things. She preferred late nights out with friends and partying while sleeping in the whole day to taking her life seriously. I couldn't deal. I focused mostly on taking care of my child while my husband was constantly trying to deal with Anna. He got tired of Anna's drama and sent her out of his house, which she also claimed was my fault. She left, probably to stay with some friends, but then some months later, my husband gets a call from her friend claiming Anna had gotten into an accident. Honestly, I was a bit skeptical because Anna was quite cunning. She was always trying to make up situations that could get back into living with us and continuing the same cycle of leeching off her brother. To my surprise, Anna had indeed gotten into an accident, only she almost OD'd, and this just made my husband sad. I knew he was going to blame himself for not doing enough for her, but I knew better, and from what I had seen so far, he had done his best. Anna was just determined to ruin her life. After 2 weeks treatment and assessment from doctors, we were advised to take her to rehab and keep a close eye on her. So Anna came back to live with us while preparing to go to rehab. I never had any issue with Anna living with us because my husband and I actually lived in the house left for them by their parents, so technically Anna had rights to her parents' house too, and I knew that. Besides, I couldn't stop her from having a relationship with her brother because I also had a sibling who was married, and it wouldn't be fair to be casted out by him. I tried on several occasions to explain to Anna that her brother only wants what's best for her, but to her, I am and have constantly been a threat to her. Anna was taken to rehab, where she actually seemed to be getting better. She didn't want me coming over to visit as per her request, but Harper and my husband were welcome, and if that was what she wanted, I was more than ready to oblige. Anything to make her feel comfortable. After spending months in rehab, Anna seemed better. I knew she needed all the help she can get in trying to stay clean, so I suggested she come and stay with us. I could keep an eye on her since I mostly work from home. I'm a writer, so I was mostly indoors, which my husband thought was a great idea. I knew I just had to deal, no matter how much Anna tried to frustrate me. So yeah, she came over to stay and began plotting with her new lawyer boyfriend on how to get the house for herself. The thing is, husband's parents had actually left the house under their children's name, but since hubby became the sole provider for his siblings, the house automatically went to him. And besides, Jasper had no interest in the building. But apparently Anna and her lawyer boyfriend were trying to build up a case against my husband being the owner of the house, which was possible since each sibling had a certain level of rights over the place. I knew my husband. He was the type to give up a house just because his siblings wanted it. He was that generous. He just wanted his family to live peacefully, and if Anna had just asked, he would have given her the deed to the place because a part of him always felt like he was cheating his siblings by living with his family in a house that was supposed to be for his siblings and him, but I always assured him he was doing his best for them and they knew it, so they could never blame him for living in the house with his family. Anna didn't see things that way. I overheard her talking to her lawyer boyfriend on the phone on how to make her case against her brother and the necessary documents she needed to stake her claims over the house. And that broke my heart because my husband would be shattered by the news. I was planning on telling my husband about what I overheard, but Anna had gotten her lawyer to serve my husband earlier at work. I had never seen my husband so angry. He called his attorney, who explained to him that since each sibling had equal right to the house, it was best they either sold it and shared the money, or they both lived in the house. I was against selling the place because it was actually a nice house in a good neighborhood, and my husband also agreed it would be unwise to sell. So we called Anna to reason with her over dinner. Anna's response was that she could only share the house with her brother if I was out of it. Now that got me mad. She said she didn't care where I lived as long as I left my daughter with them and left the house. My husband said that was never going to happen, and she said she wasn't going to settle, so it was game on. After a couple of court sessions, I knew our chances were slim, so I did the one thing that I honestly knew would take Anna down. I slipped in drugs into her suitcase. Back then, I wasn't thinking. I knew the only way the court would refuse to grant Anna access to the house was if she wasn't mentally fit to take care of the building, so I slipped in drugs into her suitcase when she decided to take a quick trip to some friends, as she always did, and she got caught at the airport. Her past drug use reputation didn't earn her any points. She spent a few weeks in jail, and the court denied her rights to the house. She of course blamed me this time for destroying her life, and since this was something she did regularly, no one took her seriously. We got Jasper to let go of the deed to the house by paying him, and he was more than fine with the arrangement since he didn't have any use for the house anyways, and Anna packed up and left. I haven't heard from her since, but according to her brother, she's been working at a store, although she's refused to talk to him or contact him in any way. Did I regret what I did? No, but I wish there was a more amicable way to have settled the matter. But in the end, what matters to me is that my family is safe and secure. It sounds like Miss Anna here was just beyond the point of reasoning, and it's almost like she's doing these things just to be spiteful. One random question I had though, where did OP get those drugs from to slip into her bag? I mean, look, I'm not judging or anything. That was just something that was casually omitted from the context of this story. But no, do what you gotta do to protect your family. Your sister-in-law, she's not worth the time of day. Our next story is, maybe don't fire people unjustly? Before I begin this, I know many people would not agree with lots of things I have to say. But the truth remains the truth, and you can't change what is fact. The fact remains that when someone practically has all the secrets of your entire family, you do not do things that would annoy them. And for the love of God, if you do believe in one, don't try to fire them unjustly. It would never end well, at least in my case. I made sure it didn't end well. I was always the quiet type, the one who just kept their head down and did the work. My job was to take care of everything for the Petersons, a wealthy family who lived in one of the biggest mansions in the city. You name it, I did it. Cooking, cleaning, watching the kids, running errands, and even being there for them when things got tough. I was more than just a caregiver. I was like a part of the family, or at least that's what I thought. And maybe I was the stupid one for thinking that these rich folks could ever see those who did not have as much as they did, or lived as lavishly as they did, as anything more than trash. Truth be told, the Petersons were the kind of family everyone envied. Mr. Peterson was a big shot in finance, always in his fancy suits, and Mrs. Peterson was all about charity work and social events, always in the spotlight for her good deeds. On the outside, they seemed perfect. A picture-perfect family with their beautiful home, polite kids, and a lifestyle everyone dreamed of. They always threw the most lavish parties, donated to the biggest causes, and made sure the world saw them as the ideal family. But behind those closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Having worked with rich people for many years, I can boldly assert that it was the same with all of them. An almost perfect exterior with a deteriorating, stinking interior. But this is about the Petersons. I had been working for them for over 5 years, and in that time, I practically ran the household. I was the first one up and the last one to bed, making sure everything was just right. I knew all of their routines, their likes and dislikes, and even the little things that made them tick. When Mr. Peterson came home late from work, stressed and snappy, I was the one who had his favorite meal ready. When Mrs. Peterson needed someone to help organize her charity events, I was right there, even if it meant staying up all night. The kids, well, they saw me more than their own parents did. I helped them with their homework, took them to soccer practice, and listened to them when they had problems. I wasn't just their employee, I was a constant, steady presence in their chaotic lives. I genuinely cared for them, and for a long time, I thought they cared for me too. I didn't just do my job, I went above and beyond because I felt like it mattered. But to them, I was just another tool. I was merely something useful until I wasn't. They never showed it outright, but the cracks were there if you knew where to look. And soon enough, I got to see just how shallow their gratitude really was. It all happened so fast, and honestly, I still can't believe how it went down. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner like any other day when Mrs. Peterson stormed in, her face red and eyes narrowed. She had her phone in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper in the other. She threw the paper down on the counter and glared at me as if I'd just committed the worst crime imaginable. "Do you have anything to say about this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. I picked up the paper, my hands trembling as I scanned the text. It was an email exchange about some missing funds from one of her charity accounts. A large sum had been withdrawn, and somehow, my name was mixed into the whole mess. It didn't make any sense because I'd never touched any of their money, and I certainly wasn't involved in any of their finances. I tried to explain, my voice cracking as I said, "I don't know what this is about, I swear. I haven't done anything." But Mrs. Peterson wasn't listening. She cut me off, her voice rising. "I trusted you. We all trusted you. How could you do this to us?" The words stung, each one like a slap to the face. I felt my throat tighten, my chest heavy with a mix of confusion and hurt. Mr. Peterson walked in then, his expression stern, not even looking me in the eye. "We can't have someone like you in our home anymore. Pack your things and leave, immediately," he said coldly, as if I were just some stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I stood there, stunned, my mind racing. After everything I'd done for them, after all the long hours and sleepless nights, they were tossing me out without even hearing me out. They didn't want to listen to my side of the story. It was like all those years of loyalty and hard work meant nothing. I tried to plead with them, to get them to see that there had been some kind of mistake, but they were set on blaming me. Mrs. Peterson just shook her head and turned away, as if the sight of me disgusted her. It wasn't just the firing that hurt, it was the way they did it. There was no discussion, no investigation, just immediate blame. They treated me like I was a criminal without any evidence, without any proof, just their assumptions and accusations. The coldness in their eyes was unbearable. They didn't care about the truth, they just wanted someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. No goodbye, no thank you for everything I'd done, just a swift and heartless dismissal. I packed my things in silence. The tears that were pouring from my eyes were stinging as I packed the little things I had in the room they provided for me. I saw their kids peeking around the corner, confused and upset, but Mrs. Peterson quickly shooed them away, like I was some kind of bad influence they needed to be protected from. I left the house that day with a heavy heart, feeling not just tired, but discarded. All I could think about was how I had given so much of myself to them, only to be tossed aside without a second thought. It was more than unfair. It was a betrayal, cut and simple. A few weeks after I was fired, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about the whole situation. I ran into one of the other house staff members at the grocery store, and after some small talk, she hesitated but eventually told me the truth. The missing funds and the accusations against me were all fabricated. Mrs. Peterson had felt that I was becoming too comfortable in their home, like I was more than just an employee, and they wanted me gone. They didn't like that I was getting too close to the kids or that I knew too much about their personal lives. The firing was just a way to push me out, using a lie as an excuse. To be fair and truthful, I would be lying if I said that it would not have hurt if they had just told me the truth about why I was being fired. It would have hurt, but maybe not as much as it did. Maybe I would not have felt betrayed by people I had devoted a long time of my life serving and making them feel comfortable. That was the moment everything clicked, and my sadness turned to anger. After everything I had done, they kicked me out simply because they couldn't stand having someone they couldn't fully control. I knew then that I couldn't just let it go. They had played dirty, and it was time for them to see what it felt like. I started gathering all the secrets I had kept for them over the years. The shady business deals, the fake charity reports to accumulate more donations, and the way they treated their staff behind closed doors. And more importantly, the facade of unity that they clung to dearly like it was their source of livelihood. I had too many things on them, and I knew I wanted to tarnish their precious image. What I didn't know was how I was going to let them out. Where I got the confidence from, I do not know. However, I decided to take my case to the blogs as an anonymous tipper. I would not take the story I had to the big publications because I knew they would get to the Petersons and that would spell doom for me, and a part of me did not think they would take me seriously. Regardless, they were wealthy people and I was not oblivious to the way the rich operated. The first secret I leaked was small, just a pebble in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough to start the ripple. I anonymously sent an email to a local blogger known for digging up dirt on the city's elite. It was about Mrs. Peterson's charity. The Petersons were praised for their charitable work, always showing off how much they donated and the events they hosted. But I knew the truth. Most of that money never went where it was supposed to. Instead, it went right back into their pockets to fund their own lavish lifestyle. The first tip revealed that one of their recent charity galas, which was supposed to raise money for a children's hospital, had actually funneled a big chunk of the funds into Mr. Peterson's new business venture. The blog post went up, and while it didn't explode right away, it caused a stir. People started questioning the Petersons' real intentions, and the comments were full of suspicion. But it was not enough to get people talking big time. Not enough to do the damage I wanted to do to their family name and their reputation. Next, I released details about Mr. Peterson's shady business practices. He was known as a financial genius, someone who always stayed on the right side of the law, or so people thought. I tipped off a reporter about his habit of cutting corners and making backdoor deals that bordered on illegal. The reporter claimed he could not act on my words alone and he would have to do his research, so I wasn't expecting much from him. At least not till I saw the article. The article that followed was a bombshell, filled with facts and documents that painted him as a greedy, unscrupulous businessman who cared more about his bottom line than the people who worked for him. This wasn't just a whisper in the dark, it was a full-blown accusation with evidence to back it up. From there, it snowballed. I started feeding information about their personal lives, their constant fights, the way they treated their staff like dirt, the lies they told to keep up appearances. Each new tip was like fuel to the fire, and the media ran with it. Gossip sites, newspapers, and even local news channels picked up the story. Every day, there was something new about the Petersons, and their perfect image crumbled a little more. The family that once couldn't take a step without the cameras fawning over them was now hiding from the lenses. That was all I wanted. I did not need them to know that I was the one feeding people the information about them. Plus, they did not think I knew about the details of their wrongdoing all the years I worked with them. So, it was a win-win for me. You know, with a family like this that's just as phony as a $3 bill, if it wasn't OP, it was going to be someone else that kind of brought down the hammer on them. They were going to be exposed eventually, so satisfying conclusion to someone that deserved it. Hate it for the kids, though. The kids didn't do anything wrong. Please tell me you made up with the kids. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and comment below, and if you want to check out our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.